Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome to another episode of the Professor Game podcast, and we are here with Barbara. But Barbara, before we take off, before we start, we want to know, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, that's such an important question. I'm almost always ready to engage.
Great, awesome, because we have Barbara Chamberlin with us today. I hope I pronounced that one correctly. And she directs the research and development at the Learning Lab at New Mexico State University. She first started developing educational games in the early 90s and sought her doctorate to help guide ways research could inform the design of educational games. Her department creates research-based educational media such as games, apps, animations, video, interactive programs, and virtual reality experiences for a wide range of audiences and content. And her Ph.D. is from the University of Virginia in educational technology. So, Barbara, is there anything we're missing from that intro that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I guess I can say a little bit more about our shop. We really kind of work as a nonprofit design shop. So I'm at New Mexico State University, but it's not a teaching program. It's an outreach program. So everything we create through the Learning Games Lab is educational media that's based on research. So whether it's about math learning or financial literacy or water marketing or any of the concepts that we've done, health, science, any of those fields, everything's based in some kind of research at the university and designed to help everyday normal people apply research in meaningful ways. And of course, I love to do that through games and gameful experiences.
That sounds fantastic and exactly the main discussions that we have here on the podcast. So very excited to have you on, Barbara. And let's start very straightforward question, and one that we like to do, especially to get to know a little bit better our guests, because we'd like to know, what does a day in the life of Barbara look like, or what are you regularly doing? What would that be? How does that feel like today?
Ooh, that's such a good question, and I should have been prepared for that. I'll give you one of my favorite days. So let's talk about what my favorite games are. My favorite days are when we get to do our design summits around a learning experience, and we get to bring our content specialists in. We like to have someone who's an expert in the content, someone who is an expert in the teaching of that content, the pedagogy around that, and then certainly people who are experts from our own team, our development team, in creating whatever that's going to be. And so then we might do a day and a half design summit where we go through our design process. And I love those days because we have the opportunity to go from, oh, we have so much potential and so much energy and so many great ideas, to like, oh my gosh, this is too much. How can we never do it? Oh, what were we thinking? And then by the second day, we come back around to, no. I got an idea. Yeah. We can make this work. And so those kinds of days are so much fun for me. It's a good busy, it's a frantic busy, but it's designing and it has all the hope of creating real change in people. And so those kinds of days I love. I also love the days when we might have a user testing session in our studio where we bring kids or other intended users in and we test our products. Because either you test and you find out you were right along the lines and yes, tweak this many things, but we got it. That's a good day. Or you reveal something that, wow, I did not see that coming. Thank goodness we're changing that. And that's a good day. So I love those kinds of days when we get to do that. But then sometimes I'll have a day where we're really diving into the research of what we're doing. Maybe we're researching a project that's coming and we're trying to figure out best processes or best methods or how research can inform what we design. Or maybe we're designing research to measure the impact of one of our games and we're looking at all the different methodologies and beyond just a pre-post test. How could we evaluate what changes we're having? So I find that for my work, certainly I spend a lot of time alone in my office writing a grant proposal or a report or doing some writing. But my favorite days are when I'm really interacting with people, either designing research or designing product.
Very, very interesting days. Those are definitely one of the things that gets people excited when we're talking about creating games, creating gamification for education, for learning. It's something that's definitely exciting. However, when I'm doing the workshops and I tell people, we are going to be designing, all the game mechanics. We're going to be using all these interesting things. But first, we have to know our objectives and who we're designing for. It's like, oh, bummer. That's not the fun part in the games and all that, but I do think it is foundational. And I'm sure in many ways, you probably do it in a different way than we do, but you still take into consideration that, because that is in the end the North Star that lets you
absolutely
get guided to, I'm going to use this or I'm not going to use this. How, what does this theme make sense if I'm using a theme?
Yes.
All those things sort of fall in place with your objectives.
Yeah. I think it's that you talked about when nothing can bum a good design rap like the word objective, right? But all design is a process, in the same way that I think all kind of learning in and of itself is fun and engaging. If you can find what is engaging about positive personal growth, because positive personal growth is always engaging. We just have to sometimes reveal that in our work. But when it comes to figuring out all those problems, I like all the aspects of design. And so for me, really trying to articulate and refine what is the change we're trying to make in a person, and have the kinds of rich discussions that really lead to that. Someone coming up with a fun game idea and just chasing that down, that's actually not fun. It's fun for the one person who has the idea and is excited about sharing it. And we all have been there. And yes, that's a lot of fun. Then you have the letdown of that, because then you find the ways it won't work, or the challenges, or maybe your fun idea doesn't align with the change you're really trying to make with someone. Exactly. So what I really like, while those bursts of ideas are fun and they're fun for us to have, what's really more engaging and enjoyable for me in the long term is going through the process and letting the process work. And going through the process and realizing, oh man, I really thought we were trying to help people do this, but I realized they already know how to do that. They just choose not to. So we're not trying to give them skill. We're trying to get them to engage in behavior. That's a different problem to solve. Or to say, this is what we thought they were going to do, but that's not the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to solve this other problem. But there's a better way to teach that thing. So I really enjoy going through that process. And it's kind of like a longer burn of enjoyment, right? You get that initial waha for a fun idea, which is fun for that moment. But going through a design process and doing it with others and thinking through ideas and working through challenges and coming up with solutions, that's a much longer burn of enjoyment. And that's the thing that makes me feel like we are doing this right. We know what we're doing. We as a group are bringing our collective skills, and we are the right group to do it. That is as big a high as you can get in your professional life, is to feel like you are well trained, you're going through a good process, you have the right team, and you are doing work at exactly the right time. Oh, that's the perfect career right there. That's perfect.
Yes, absolutely. So, Barbara, you clearly have plenty of experience doing these things, and experience comes with the ups and comes with the downs as well. So we'd like to know, we started kind of strong in that sense. We'd like to get into one of those downs, one of those times where, you were going for something, it just didn't work. We like to call it one of those fail moments or first attempts in learning. We were just discussing how that also means it's feedback and you turn it around and so on. But we want to be, sort of get into that low and see as well, maybe how you got out of it or what you did to continue moving forward with that. Yeah. Or another game idea.
Sure. One of my new favorite mantras is mistakes contain information. And that's such a positive spin. I like when you think which failure in my life? There's so many. Which one do we want to explore? That's sort of a deficit viewpoint, right? All the areas I couldn't do something. And so it's so lovely to kind of think about, where did I have a powerful opportunity to switch my thinking about something? And that's happened often. But I think probably the one, and I tell this story, it was such an important turning point for me, because while I loved being an educational designer and developing educational media and games, I hadn't really jumped into user testing methods and how we could do that better. And this was a turning point for me in that event. And we were doing a series of animations for our Mass Snacks suite of games. And it was actually called Bad Date. This was many years ago, about, almost 20 years ago now. And we had done some user testing with this little animation where the girl is trying to find a date. She talks so much. And the guy's like, oh, well, and it was looking at the ratio of words spoken. That was our goal, was to teach ratios. And we'd user tested it, and kids thought it was funny, and we were feeling really good about it. And I shared it with our advisory board, and everyone was like, great, the kids like it, we're good here. Great, excellent. And so then I went into the bathroom, and when I was in the bathroom stall, I heard two other women on our advisory board talking, and the nature of the conversation was like, oh my gosh, can you believe what we just heard? And the other one saying, I know. I felt like I went back 20 years ago, oh, this was so horrible. And I was sort of struck by this, first off, I was just in that meeting and it sounded like it went really well. Why didn't you all say something? So I came out and I'm like, hey, yeah, I overheard that. What did we miss there? And they said, well, we didn't want to be the only person to say something, but you're playing to the stereotypes of women talking too much and all of these different dynamics that I had completely missed in our previous testing. And then my approach to this, I didn't understand that subtext at all. And so I said, this was fantastic, but why didn't you speak up in the meeting? And they said, because you would turn us into that person bringing this issue up. And we didn't want to be that person. I'm like, wow, yeah, I see how uncomfortable and how unfair that was. So that really transformed my way of thinking about user testing, getting different perspectives, enabling the person who's maybe quietest in the room or has another reason not to be outed for giving their feedback. I think when it comes to user testing, one of the easiest things in the world, I could absolutely, without a lot of effort, set up a user test session that confirms everything I believe about a product. That's easy. It's much harder to delve in and get multiple perspectives to say, what are the experiences that me and my team don't already have? And how do we inform our product development with that? How do we go and hear that which we're not hearing? So that was such a powerful moment. It turned out that we turned the bad data animation around. Addressing that issue that they had of addressing that stereotype caused us to reverse it. And in the end, it made the animation so much better. Not only was it better to not feed into this negative stereotype, but as all issues with representation and accessibility, if you fix one aspect for one area, it almost makes it better in every area. So that was a really fun launching off point for me for delving into this whole other area of development. It was a good fail.
And what would you start doing differently? Because you were mentioning like empowering those people who don't speak up in your user testing and so on. Like after that, what would have been an immediate action you would have taken if you had known that information right before the user testing? What would you have done differently?
So there's a couple of different things. One is, who are we testing with? And so I always think of the +1, -1 audience and stakeholders. That's the big takeaway. So if you're designing a game that's to be used in a 6th grade classroom, how does it feel to 4th and 5th graders? How does it feel to 7th and 8th graders? So that's the first, is to go plus and minus who your audience is for age or people who are in this category but slightly different. And then the other is to go back and look at stakeholders. So that's an important audience, not just your user testers, but people who work with that audience, be it teacher or volunteer leaders, whoever it is. Or if you're working with parents, can you talk to their kids about what you're designing for adults? So the gatekeepers to that audience and asking that. So that's one, is how do you change your audience you test with and expand it? But the second is, how do you change your methodologies? And so part of that is, I believe you need to give people opportunities to answer the same question several times, which sounds boring, and I don't mean that quite the way I sound. What I mean by that is, give them a chance to address the thing you want to know about from their own perspective. And then you ask them to address that issue you want to know about from someone else's perspective. So an example of that could be, we have this character in a game. How do you feel about them? And is this character someone you would like to go have lunch with? Tell me about that. And so you get to hear them tell you about what they think about this character. They're boring, they're dull, they're too old, whatever it is. And then maybe you have other questions. And then maybe you revisit and you would say, think of that character. Who in your life would like that character? Who would want to go out with them? Or who would play this game? So a good example of that is, if you're just trying to figure out, does this game appeal to a given age group? You never ask that, but you go to the age group you're sharing it with and you say, what age group is this designed for? And if they say, maybe my younger brother, it might be a little too juvenile. So it's that idea of giving multiple forms of feedback. Ask them a question, maybe do some focus group, maybe do some individual video closet is one of my favorite, where participants can go in and answer a question on an iPad after they've had a chance to think about it. That really controls groupthink of focus groups. Maybe it's a creative activity where they're drawing. So give your user testers multiple ways to give feedback so that you can kind of lead people to that path of thinking to mention or reveal the thing that you haven't caught.
Very, very interesting insights. Thank you for all those, all that experience that you're sharing here on that process, Barbara. And let's actually take a spin on this. We were talking about a first attempt in learning, a time where things went wrong and the lessons from that. How about we go for actually a proud moment? One of those, you created this game or you did this experience and it actually went super well. You're super proud of it. We want to sort of be there on that creationist story, so to speak, and see what went right. What do you think are some of the factors of success? And in general, just be there with you and learn from that experience.
Yeah. Oh, best days. Okay. So I have two. One is our game Night of the Living Dead, which is designed to teach credit score to high school students. And so the idea is you can play it individually. It's an app on the Apple Store for iPad. And you go through, and it's this post apocalyptic zombie world where you're trying to do things that impact your score in the game, which is exactly like your credit score. So maybe you're having to figure out if you can go to school or how you can go collect some junk in the demolished waste yard to get some money for different opportunities. But you have credit cards, you get loans, that sort of thing. And the seat time is fairly short. You can play the whole game in about 20 minutes. And so one of the things that's really interesting about it, my favorite way I've ever seen it implemented, was a large room, maybe 3 to 4 kids per iPad, and maybe you have 4 or 5 or 6 of those groups. And so you don't introduce it. You just start with open gameplay, as we encourage with our games. Just start playing, and the kids start playing it, and they're kind of talking to each other. And one kid might be like, I don't know, what is a credit card? What's the difference between a credit card and a debit card? And the other kid's like, oh, I know that. So they're kind of sharing, collaborating in groups on that. And then after about 15 minutes, you say, okay, iPad's down. How do you win this game? And you just ask that question. And you get the kids started talking about the gameplay, because when they talk about the gameplay, they're actually talking about the content. And all of a sudden, these students who are maybe 14, 15 years old are saying things like, here's the deal. You never take a subprime loan. Don't go to the subprime loan guy, because as soon as you take a subprime loan, even if you pay it back, you're going to wreck your credit score. And I remember in one of our sessions where we did this, and another kid, right? Another kid would be like, yes, the trick is you want to get a credit card, but make it manageable. Put just a small payment on it every month and pay it off immediately. And so it was just such this powerful moment of not only our game and our app, which I love all of our children, but I love that app as well. But such a powerful demonstration of what collaborative social learning is like when it's enhanced by gameplay, that you put it, and it kind of feeds my viewpoint of how we learn, very constructivist in my orientation to learning, that we are best as learners when we're put into guided experiences that structure meaningful ways for us to make sense out of things. And this game did that. So we put these people in a group where it's relevant to them, where they can play, where they can fail safely, where they get meaningful, all the things we know that games are so great at. And then you give them opportunities to talk to each other and to share it. And we've had that reinforce itself many times, especially in games that we make that are designed for youth or for kids in classroom environments. The importance of the idea that the game is not enough, that wrapping around discussion, encouraging reflection, encourage sharing out, always enhances the transformation more. And then the second time I have that I just threw my arms up into the air with joy was, again, on our Mass Snacks suite of games. We've done a couple different rounds on those games, and the most recent was to do algebra. And one of our postdocs did a study, in addition to our impact of just how the games changed. She did a study specifically on teachers. And the teachers in our study who hadn't used a lot of games before and were using the Mass Snacks games in conjunction with their already previously established curriculum. And so she did a deep dive into the teachers about how their views of gameplay changed. And spoiler alert, it was fantastic because some of the outcomes is that teachers realized games aren't just for practice. Games aren't that as a teacher, they play an important role in the education that comes from games. And so one of the direct quotes from the teachers was something like, I realized that when I use a game in the classroom, it's not just to let them practice something I already taught them, but it's a powerful way for them to understand a concept in a more meaningful way. And then I have an important role in helping them apply that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I feel like all my work in games now is worth it. Even if it's just this one teacher who started understanding that games aren't just for play. They aren't just for practice. They aren't just for filling spare time in the classroom. Yes, that's what I want to happen more of. So that was definitely one of those wonderful moments. I smiled all day that day.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those days where you would probably spend smiling. Any of the engagers, I'm sure, can relate to something like that. If it's happening, it's exactly where you want to get. So what would you say, like, maybe there's something you would attribute at least a part of that success to, like, what do you think you did right for that to actually come to fruition?
Oh, I found really smart people to work with, for starters. That was part of it. You know, one of the nice things about Mass Snacks is I worked on it with most of the same team of people for 8, 9, 10, sometimes 11 years. And so over that period of time, I am not a math teacher, but I was informed by people who had great insight into how we can change the way math is is taught, how we can change the way we approach it, how we can support that. I'm a big proponent. I am not in any way, as many of us, I am not in any way trying to replace classrooms with games. That's not the point at all. The point is to bring this new tool into the toolbox and to help teachers be at their very best in supporting them with things that are hard to grasp. And math is such a great example of that, because you as a teacher might get these students for this sixth grade year, but their understanding of how fractions work are informed by their sense of how a number line works, which they learned 3 or 4 years ago, which is informed of their sense of how numbers work, which was informed 2 years before that. So it's sometimes hard in math to just teach this one thing because you have all this context and prior knowledge around it. So if we can provide tools that help teachers with all of that so that they can be the best teacher in the place that they're at, that's what I want to do. And I surrounded myself with people who understood that and learned that. And then honestly, I've got this amazing group of developers here that just, yes, they can do the art. Yes, they can create the animations. Yes, they can make a solid interface. But what I love about our team here is I think when you're making transformational media, nobody does their one thing. Nobody is only an animator. Nobody is only a programmer. Nobody is only doing the audio files. Everybody, and at least in addition to that, are instructional designers. So it's really important for everybody on the team to understand why, to use the fractions example, why that's so problematic, why it's so hard for kids to learn, so that at any point in the design process, anybody, whether doing programming or audio, can say, hey, remember in our design summit, we talked about this thing. We had planned for this part of the game to be this way, but I was thinking if we did this, it might help. And so that kind of constant iteration by everybody on our team is critical. And I think that's what makes those moments work, is everybody involved in creating this product really is committed to the positive transformation we want in the user. And when you have everybody on the team who's informed of that, they understand that they're working towards that. Yeah, we're not all perfect, and we're going to have some that don't maybe quite hit the mark. But the point is, again, to use a process so that as much as possible, you can correct all of those things, and everybody can correct all those things until the final product is solid. And then it's the same with research, right? You do that in development, but then you have to do research methodologies, quantitative, qualitative, mixed. You want to do some interviews. You want to have somebody asking this question, but maybe somebody else is doing a research project that's kind of related. So it's the same thing. It's kind of attacking with all cannons, is that metaphor, but shooting with all cannons on a ship. You want to use everything that you have to investigate the question. You want to use everything that you have to teach or to change or to make a product.
Sounds great. I just have one doubt, and this is something that I've heard. In fact, I think it was with Dave Chandros that we were discussing this, like the importance as well of giving, like not putting everybody in their place of you're not good enough for this and that. Not in that sense, definitely, but who is the specialist on what, and making sure that sort of the singing voice in instructional design is an actual instructional designer, game design is a game designer, game developer is a game developer. So I don't know if that's sort of contrary to that, or if it fits into what you were saying. Does it actually fit, and how do you manage that difference, so to speak?
That's interesting to use that term, like singing voice. I think I kind of think of it more like immersion, that we certainly have someone on our team who knows math. And we certainly have someone on our team who knows the best way to create an interface. And we certainly have someone on our team that can think about things from an accessibility standpoint. But what you don't want is to say, nobody here is responsible for accessibility except for this person. And nobody here gets to think about math except for that person. So while we all have those strengths, it is each of those persons' responsibility to help other people understand their field. Because once we all understand it, it doesn't mean if you're not the math person that you can't say, this is something I've always struggled with, or this is something I've seen for everybody. Our research area, our expertise area, our professional area is just one thing that informs our products. We all have personal experience. We all have lived experiences. We all have biases. We all have favorite games. So what we'll do in Immersion, for example, is we might have our content expert give us a deep dive into the content. What are the principles when you are growing microgreens in your backyard where food safety is a problem? I don't know that, but our content specialist does, and they immerse us in that. And then we do immersion in how do social media campaigns use for things like this or other things like that. And two things are important about that. One, we all learn about the areas that are different from us. But two, it puts us all somewhat more on a playing field and saying, now as a team, we are all solving this problem and we are all responsible for all of the areas.
Makes a lot of sense. So thanks for that clarification. I was expecting something like this would come, but I wanted to challenge you in that way. And you've discussed like sort of pieces and parts of how you do these things, but do you have some form of process? Like, how do you approach creating these educational games? A project comes up. How do you approach it? How does it start? Maybe what are the steps if you have them? How does that look like?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Jesse Schell and I started our work like within a year of each other, and we both did a public installation within a year of each other. And so we evolved. We didn't know each other, but over the past 20 years, we've kind of evolved a very similar process to doing these things. So the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, we've been working on a book to get this down.
Nice.
We're articulating the way other people can do it. And so it's really a very simple, it's kind of like there's a lot of great instructional design models out there, but it's really, we call it the transformational game design model. And so the idea is the first step is you're looking at what kind of change you are trying to create in the player. Is it simple knowledge? Is it their skill, what they can do it? Is their behavior, what they choose to do? Is it a physiological change we're seeking to create? Is it an emotional change or a state of mind we're trying to change? And really foster rich discussion. It's not a simple worksheet that you fill out where you fill it out and you're done. It's designed to get the group engaged in discussion around those areas. And then the second major area for discussion is, what does a person have to do to go through those changes? Do they need to reflect? Do they just need to be exposed to knowledge? Do they need to be challenged? Do they have an emotional experience? Do they need to apply it to their own lives? Do they need to practice something? And again, we have a whole great list of verbs that you can kind of go through to work with your team to start thinking about what kind of activities does a person do to experience that meaningful change. And then if you can have a rich back and forth in those areas, what comes out of that is not just a learning objective, although you could certainly use that word, but a really nice roadmap for what is the change we're creating and what does a person have to do to go through those changes. And then through that, we have guiding questions like, why isn't this already happening? What of these changes are already being done well? And we look at other research, a behavioral change model or any of the learning theory models can inform all of that. But at its heart, it's how do people change? And what do we think people need to do to create that change? And then once you have that, your third step is then how do we use this game to engage people in those activities? So what's important about that is if you make those three things linked, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a quiz game for knowledge if what you're trying to do is to get people to be better at quickly recalling facts that they have learned. But if you have a quiz game for knowledge when you are trying to change someone's attitude about something, it's not going to work. And so what's important about those things is everybody on the team is clear on the change, clear on the activities, and then you get the joy of making the engagement. Do we engage with story? Do we engage with score and feedback? Do we engage in social collaboration? What kind of engagement helps people go through the activities that they're not already going through? And when we put it kind of in those terms, it really helps get the team articulate then in a design document, okay, these are the changes we're going to make. This is what we're not going to do. And usually what comes out of that then is a couple different approaches for how a game could apply that. And then you're at the point that you can start designing the game for play.
Nice. Thank you very much for sharing that bunch of ideas and knowledge of how you do
that was kind
things.
of a fire hose there, wasn't it?
Very nice. I'm sure some engagers will definitely go back, a few seconds and listen to that again. Maybe take notes. I encourage you to do that if you're not sort of driving or anything of the sort. Taking notes is very, very encouraged in every one of the episodes, especially when we have sort of these deep end discussions. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Barbara, we kind of went into something around these lines, but would you say that there is some sort of best practice? One of those things that, any educational game project can perhaps benefit from doing this and get a bit of better results?
There's two things that we have done in the past 3 years that have been really important to us. And I'm really pleased with it because it's given us some capabilities that I was hoping it would. And the first was looking at issues of accessibility. And the second is looking at issues of representation, which relates to issues regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we've always cared a lot about accessibility and looked at colorblind issues or contrast or issues with text or captioning, that sort of thing. And so we've always done kind of what we could on that. And a few years ago, we said, okay, there have got to be better guidelines for what this looks like in games. And we're seeing in the accessibility field this huge movement forward put forth by Able Gamers and many others. Microsoft's led some of that about accessibility. And I fear that one of the takeaways from that is for those groups who want to be good people and make games accessible, they can go figure it out. And I kind of changed my voice there a little bit to be like, sure, that's great. But here's the deal. Accessibility, everybody is on a spectrum of need when it comes to visual, hearing, cognitive, motor control. Everybody is somewhere on that spectrum. And when we make our game, when we design our game considering those areas, it makes it better for everybody on the spectrum of any of those individual areas and where they will be. So we did a deep dive in when we redid a bunch of our old games because they were in Flash. We said, okay, we're going to be really intentional about looking at issues for accessibility for that. And it was a fantastic experience because that informed for us how important and really, in the end, valuable it is to the end game to consider all these things all the way through, that accessibility from the very beginning. So we now have a whole team going through this process. Our whole team is really well informed about these things and thinking about them. And I think that makes every product going forward even better. We're starting to do VR work. And right out of the gate, we're like, okay, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of access by different users? So I feel like teams jumping into accessibility will make their products better, not just better for an individual user that they might have in mind, though that is very important, but better for everybody. And very similar are issues regarding representation. I only have lived the life I have lived. I can't give myself the experience somebody else has. And so it's really important for me to not only recognize that and seek other experiences to inform our work, but to create a work environment where everybody feels that's encouraged and welcomed. So we have put together guiding principles for our shop, and they're on our website if anybody wants to look at them to use their own guiding principles about representation and what that means for us. It's not just characters, it's family, it's hair color and skin tone, sure, but it's also financial arrangements, family living arrangements. And so it makes us look very carefully at any given product for what do we have for representation, and also at the collection of all of our projects, and not just visually, but in terms of story. And so I think through that, we now, again, have a whole team of people who are actively asking questions about this and, hey, what perspectives are we missing? Where people who might say, oh, well, I have a unique experience, but I don't want to bring it up the team. I'm hoping we can make an environment where they feel more comfortable bringing up that experience to enrich the whole team. And then I think we're also, or at least I am, a lot more aware of actively seeking other stories and other input on that. The first step is to realize you are not all things. And so the second step is to realize that investigating as many other experiences as you can is going to inform and create a product that's much richer for any user. Because any user is going to be at their best when they see some of themselves in the product that they use. And so we want to try to encourage that. And we want to make sure that for any individual user out there, there is media that speaks to them, that they can see themselves in, that they can learn from. So those are my big things is accessibility and then representation as it relates to that.
Cool. Thank you very much for that idea. I think it's very important. I would add to that, like the representation is like, where are you looking to be represented? Like who are the people you want to make sure are represented in whatever you're creating? Because when you create a game, as you were saying before, you say, well, it's being created for 7th graders. So you take a look at the 8th graders and the 6th graders, to sort of maybe fine tune and all this, but you're definitely not creating for, undergrads. And that also applies for, my students tend to be, I don't know, people in the US who have these characteristics. You're not designing for a kid who's lived in, I don't know, China all of his life and is still living in China. If the kid comes to that town in the US or that place in the US, maybe he would be part of that. You're not designing for everybody. You're designing for a specific group. And who are the different possibilities, the different people who could be in that group. And as we get more and more globalized, it gets harder because what is perfectly acceptable and actually encouraged in one culture might be offensive in another one. So it gets to be like a big, big, big difficulty. So make sure you're looking at what you need to be looking at. And if it's a global audience, make sure it's, as global as possible. But then, each individual representation is a bit more difficult. That would be my 2 cents. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
One of my other favorite quotes is from Justin Leitis, and he says that gym and recess are two different things. They're both really important, but they are two different things. And that was really powerful to me. I know that globally people use different terms than gym class or PE class or something like that. One is the prescribed class where you learn how to do physical activity, and the other is recess, where you have completely open-ended time to do the physical activity that is meaningful to you. And so I would correlate that with your previous point that that's exactly right. If you are trying to design for everybody, that is a significant design goal. And that is a very different approach than designing for a specific audience. And if you're designing for a specific audience, do that well and see if there's anything intentional you've done that excludes people. And if you are designing for everybody, keep that in mind as well. One of the other things I have up on my board, that's not my term, of course, but the idea of nothing about us without us. There is, if we are targeting any individual group, or if we are trying to represent an individual group, it's not my job to represent them. It's my job to go to them and make sure they feel represented. So where we are able to is to include people whose stories we are correlating to, or people whose appearance we're trying to emulate or something like that, and just make sure that our participants in media that is designed for them. And I think you're right. If you're trying to do it for a very specific user base in one area, get that right and recognize that sometimes designing for everybody waters the product for everybody.
There you go. So great design principles there. Engagers, take notes. Why not?
We do have on our website, if you go to learninggameslab.org, we do have, it's for the university. I'm at a university, so it's within the university branding on that. So it says Learning Games Lab. It takes us to the name of our department, which is Innovative Media Research and Extension. But Learning Games Lab is easier to hear and to remember. But if you go to learninggameslab.org, we have a blog on the side where we're trying to do more about documenting the processes we go through. So, for example, we have a blog on those guiding principles and how we arrived at that and how we revisit those every year. We have a blog on how we look at representation and what that means to us. We have a blog on the research and the different kinds of research that informs our work. So if that's something that people are like, whoa, what was that she just said? If you'd like to, please take a look at learninggameslab.org, hit that blog button on the list of things over on the left, and see if there's any of those things that you can pull from in your own work.
Fantastic, Barbara. And you've given plenty of great recommendations. So is there, after hearing these questions, hearing what the podcast is all about, is there somebody that comes to your mind that you would like to hear interviewed in Professor Game, in a few potential future guests, if there's anybody that comes to your mind?
Yes, I want you to talk to Dr. Matteo Cesaroto. He's a postdoc in our shop. And what I was talking about earlier, that framework for how we think about accessibility in game design, that's him, man. That's all him. He came and did research with us and guided our work. And so he and I published it, but he guided it, a framework for game designers and thinking through those accessibility, pulled in a lot of research from others and put that together. And I think I would love to see more attention being brought that accessibility isn't this side thing. As so many people are already saying this. We are not the only ones saying this. It's not this side thing to sprinkle onto your game when you're done, but it's something that makes your entire game better. And I think he'd be an interesting person for all of your engagers, all of us to hear and to learn from, to hopefully change our perspectives. He's a smart guy. He's got a lot of good things to say.
Lovely. Love that. So keeping on that same sort of rant of recommendations, is there a book that you would recommend to the engagers?
It's so funny you say that, because here on my mess of a desk, I have, 8 books sitting here. So the top 3 are ones that I have been actively referencing the past few days in writing and other things. And that's, of course, Jesse's book, Art of Game Design, just because we're working on this Art of Transformational Game Design book, but also Sabrina Sulba's book, The Transformational Framework. Sulba it reads like Cullyba, Cullyba, but she has so many great processes in there that I love. And then I really love the Research for Designers book by Muratowski, which has some great kind of insights into how can you use research to inform your design. But having said that, also in my list are 2 books, one that I've skimmed very quickly, but I haven't had a chance to dive into, and that's Kurt Squire's Making Games for Impact, which is a series of case studies in this field. And so I'm looking forward to diving into that. And then one that has been sitting here and I haven't had a chance to go through it yet is The Black Experience in Design. And that's by a number of authors in looking about their specific experiences with identity and expression and reflection. And that's just my attempt to try to bring other people's experiences into my line of sight so that I can accommodate them in our own and integrate them into our own design. So those are kind of what I'm going for. And maybe some people have some other I don't know. I'm one of those people that there is nothing that expresses my optimism in life than the number of books that sit on my counter that I hope to get to.
I can relate to.
You can relate.
You can expect that, every week I ask somebody, what is a book you would recommend, that my list is, getting long and longer.
Right.
So my optimism is pretty large as well. But they see engagers, you came looking for one recommendation, you got 5. So, talk about value there.
Well, the magic is if everyone gives them 5, they'll start to see trends in the one that keeps coming up, and then they'll know that's the one for them.
For sure. Thank
you.
you.
And then, gosh, hopefully one of these days, Jesse and I'll get our book out.
Yes,
and I can recommend that. But
well, I'll bring you hopefully both back to the podcast and discuss what makes your book interesting, and maybe give us some clues and insights as to what you discuss in there.
Yeah, I think my immediate reaction to that will be, well, it should be interesting. It took us like 10,000 years to write it. So maybe that will be the thing.
Fantastic. And you've given plenty of recommendations for people, doing great things out there. But what would you say is your superpower, that thing that you do at least better than most other people?
Wow. That's, again, I always tend to think of the areas that I'm lacking in, right? The things I wish I could do better, because there's a lot of those. I think one of my superpowers is doing a job I love. You have the right job when you don't understand why everybody doesn't want it. I love my job. And I think one of my superpowers is bringing that energy. There's so many great reasons to love a job. And maybe engagers, maybe one of you, it's because you're making great money at it. Maybe it's because you love the benefits package. I don't know. But what I love about my job is I get these windows into experiences where I realize I am creating products that help people change. They might be huge ways or small ways, but I just feel like in that idea of what do we owe to each other? We owe to each other that we give them in experiences and environments so we can each live our best lives, right? Like, I just feel like as human beings that I'm so lucky that in my job, I get to do that. And I hope that one of my superpowers is fostering that in everybody on our team here. We're at a university. I wish I could double everybody's salary. I wish I could give everybody reward trips to Hawaii. None of that happens here. But what I do hope I can do in my superpower is to help everyone keep focused on the work we do matters. We have meaning in our life, and in our work here, we have purpose. And I hope that's the superpower I can display, because everybody deserves to work with purpose.
Absolutely. That's definitely something that is very important for everybody. I'm sure, working conditions are, kind of important as well. I'm sure.
Working conditions are also important. Yes.
You definitely have those. I am convinced of this. I am pretty sure. They can always be improved. Always, salary tends to be with the first thing that comes to mind for many people. But, there's many other things that are very, very important for a work environment, and definitely being passionate and having this sense of purpose within your job is, I would say, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing in a job. So kudos for that. Definitely, Barbara. Thanks for sharing that experience that you have with us. And you mentioned that, everybody has their own favorite games and bring their own perspectives. So what would you say is your favorite game?
That is impossible. You can't ask people to pick among all their children. But I'll tell you what I'm loving right now. We're in the middle of the Wordle craze, right? March of 2022. So everyone's playing Wordle. And what I love about that is I feel like it's giving everybody who maybe hasn't thought much about games before a crash course in game design. Because when you play Wordle, you start thinking, why is this fun? And Wordle, of course, I'm talking about that guessing game where you get 5 letters to guess a 5-letter word. And you only get one a day. So what is that part of what makes it fun? What makes it hard? What makes it easier? People can share it out. Does that make it better? Does it not make it fun? How is Wordle made better when it's Quirtle or Octortle and you get to use all the same letters to guess 4 words or 8 words? How does the feedback change that? How does the timeline change that? How does the open-endedness change that? What about games like Worldle, which is a geography version of Wordle where you're trying to guess a country based on the shape? And so we're seeing kind of whenever we see these trends in gaming, I feel like it's revealing to other people what's fascinating about games. And I love that. I love this reflection that people are doing in playing games. And am I playing Wordle? Oh, yeah, you betcha. I love it. But more than that, I'm loving talking about it with others and seeing how others play it. So it's it's fun seeing that trend. To me, it's very similar to when I used to do I'd do motivational speaking, go speak at conferences quite a bit. And so I'd go and I'd talk about the power of games, and I'd talk to an audience, and I'd say, now I know this audience doesn't play games. And back then, everyone would be like, oh no, we're serious. We're academics, or we're serious professionals. And I'd say, except Angry Birds. That's just how you spend time in the bathroom. Not you, other people. Other people are playing Angry Birds. But it was fun because Angry Birds, so many people were using that casual game because it had such a following at that point. That was their entree to not only playing games, but starting to feel maybe a little okay, that spending some time playing games is okay. And so I feel like that's happening with Wordle as well. More people are integrating gameplay to their daily life. And that's a rising tide that raises all ships for us. So I like seeing more people play more games.
There you go. Absolutely. And I'm sure it's part of the gift and the curse as well of people who look into game design is you see a game and you start figuring why is that exciting? What's good about this? What are the game mechanics here? I'm not sure everybody's wondering the same things about that, but it is a very good invitation. I couldn't agree more of saying, well, why is this game exciting? It's one of the exercises I like to invite people to do is, whatever game you're finding exciting right now, sit down and play it again after, having a look at game mechanics, motivation, and all these things. What do you think about the game? What makes it exciting for you? What kind of a player are you? What gets you excited?
Absolutely.
What are the types of games you like? And it's meta, learning in that sense. I understand that I understand now. I understand what I like and why I like it. I love that perspective for sure. And Barbara, this conversation has flown away very, very quickly. I've loved and enjoyed every single piece of it. However, we're running out of time, but I don't want to let you go before you give any final words, any final piece of advice, wherever you want to go to. Let us know where we can find more about you and your work at the lab before we say goodbye.
Yeah, so learninggameslab.org is probably the best place to start. That has links to all the different media that we create and some of our research in that blog. And then, I know this is slightly different than when you asked, but you said something, I just wanted to capture it. And that is, I feel like that's all of us who are so game forward and so game enthusiastic and so immersed in our world. I feel like if that's the one thing we can give the rest of the world, that's the gift we give them. For example, parents, instead of parents who are frustrated that their kids play games, that's a feature, not a bug, right? So what we want to talk to parents about is embrace that. Your kids should be playing games, but more than just playing games. Your kids should be able to tell you why their game is good and what makes it not good. Your child should be able to explain how one game is better than the other. If we start looking at critical review of the media we consume, why do you like this TV show? Why is that show better than the other? I think that's the gift we can give people outside our field, is to get them talking about games in critical, meaningful ways. How do games improve you? How does that time improve you? How does it help your social and emotional learning? If we can help just assuming that games are good, but give people outside our field the ability to talk about it in positive ways to see change, I think that'll help us all. And you touched on that about the review that we do on all our games. Yes, let's help all the other people do that with their games as well, because I know who your engagers are. You got a smart group of people listening here. So I will say that. But then secondly, I will also say, gosh, thanks to this group, game research and talking, all of it has come so far in many years. It's fabulous to see the level of discussions that are happening everywhere in Facebook groups, at conferences. I just love that there's so many people working in all of these areas. So thank you, dear listener, for being a part of that and for bringing this field up and forward. I love it.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks again for all the insights. Thanks for those final words and all that encouragement that you're giving the audience, the engagers, to go out there and do their thing, get excited about games and how they can change education and many other fields in this world. So thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you for all the advice, all the knowledge, all the things that you have done today, all the dedication of time you have provided the engagers today. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game Podcast. And I'd like to know, how are you listening to this episode of the podcast? If you're doing it through any of the podcasting apps, have you followed or subscribed for free and rated this podcast, which is also for free? If you haven't, please go ahead and do so. That way we are able to reach more engagers like you to achieve this long mission of making learning amazing. And if you want your instructions, if you don't know how to do this, you can go to professorgame.com/iTunes. That's where I put it. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, remember to do this: follow, subscribe, whatever that looks like. Rate us on the app, even leave us some comments. I read each and every one. And listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.